This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show too. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superboy fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Before we get into our main segment on the complete series of the FILMATION Superboy cartoons, I wanted to offer a couple of follow-ups to our recent Superboy coverage and also speak for a little bit about the just-released 0-hour 30th anniversary special. So first up on the Superboy front, as you know, we've been talking about how Clark's past as Superboy was reinstated at the conclusion of Doomsday Clock by Jeff Johns and Gary Frank in late 2019. But how, in the years since, next to nothing has really been done with the whole notion of Clark as Superboy. The one, seemingly, exception to all of this came in the first issue of the current ongoing Superman series, written by Joshua Williamson. In that first issue, in early 2023, there's a double-page spread early on that shows all of these glimpses into Clark's past, and one of them appears to show Clark in his Superboy garb. But that was it, at least until now. I want to give a shout out to one of our audience members, Rick, who messaged me very recently and said, hey, have you seen Superman number 17? And I hadn't read it yet. I'm a little bit behind. I'll be catching up soon on the super titles, but I hadn't read it yet. This is the August 2024 released issue of the ongoing Superman title. It's an Absolute Power tie-in, and it has Superman in his black suit and Zatanna on the cover. So I quickly made my way over to the preview pages and was gobsmacked to see that the opening page of Superman number 17 is a flashback to Clark as Superboy. It's a 4-panel page. It opens with an exterior shot of the town, the Welcome to Smallville sign, and right next to it, it says Home to Superboy. Then Superboy comes crashing through. He's taunted by this magical foe who says, "Rad, looks like I finally found the Boy of Steel's weakness." And then it ends, the final panel is Superboy holding up his torn cape, and he says, "Shoot, Ma's gonna be mad. She just made this cape. I really, really dislike," and then we cut to the present as he completes the thought, "magic." It's only a page, but honestly, it feels like a big deal. It's the most substantial look at Clark as Superboy that we've gotten in recent years, and an encouraging way to find out that DC has not forgotten this part of Clark's past that is officially, technically, back in continuity. And I would love to hear from anyone else who was reading the issue to know what your reaction was. For those of you like Rick who have been listening to the episodes and keeping up with the Superman titles, I'm sure you had some reaction given all this talk about Superboy that we've been doing. Obviously, we'll continue to keep an eye on the super titles. And in particular, we'll wait and see when and where else and how else Clark's past as Superboy might be referenced or shown in the books. But it's funny, even just a few months ago, I probably would have rolled my eyes at that page of Clark as Superboy. But as you guys have heard, my perspective has shifted a lot over the course of all of these episodes we've done. And so I look at something like that and I'm really intrigued and excited. And I hope that it is the start of more to come. And of course, we cannot take credit for any of this, but we are having all these conversations. We're putting this out there into the universe. And so I like to think that Superboy is on the brain, right? Not just because of us, but that Superboy is on the brain in a way that maybe he hasn't been in a while. And so, again, I'm really intrigued and excited to see what else the future might hold. And if and when that happens, of course, we'll be here to talk about it. And speaking of this whole notion of Clark's past as Superboy being erased and reinstated, I also want to give a shout out to audience member Craig Beamer from the Superman homepage. He reached out to me. He wrote a great email making the case that Clark's past as Superboy was actually not erased in the New 52. That's been my contention, right? We've been talking about it in these episodes that 1986's Man of Steel clearly erases Clark as Superboy. And then the post-Infinite Crisis landscape clearly brings it back. My contention has been and remains that Clark as Superboy is jettisoned once again following Flashpoint and the beginning of the New 52. Craig felt differently. He cited Grant Morrison's Action Comics number 6. And in fairness, you do see flashback to Clark's time in Smallville, and he does receive a visit from members of the Legion, and it culminates with them flying together over Smallville. And Clark is in a cape, not unlike he would be wearing with the t-shirt and jeans when he makes his debut in Metropolis and Morrison's Action Comics #1. For me, though, that does not rise to the level of being Superboy. It's a fascinating question, though. Maybe part of it comes down to what do you think it means to be Superboy or for Clark to be Superboy? So your mileage may vary and your interpretation might be different. In my mind, the fact that a young Clark might have been wearing a cape and having some level of pre-Superman adventures, that to me maybe puts it in line with something like Smallville, but to me is not Superboy per se. I wouldn't be surprised if Morrison intended more, but we just don't really get to see it. And so I feel like there's too much that we have to kind of fill in the blanks with in our own heads. And then I think more specifically, what really convinces me, and again, you might feel differently, but we talked about that Superman Reborn storyline during the Rebirth era that combined the New 52 and pre-New 52 characters and histories of Superman and Lois Lane. And right after that, there was that two-parter from Dan Jurgens in Action Comics where Superman essentially relives the events of his life, trying to make sense of what is in and out of continuity, essentially. And in that story, there are very specific references to Superman's secret origin. You see Clark in the blue shirt and red jacket. He's there with Lana. He's there with Pete, who has a cast because of his broken arm. There's the young red-haired Lex with his kryptonite sample. Clark saving Lana from the tornado. It's all right out of Secret Origin. But what's completely missing is Clark in his Superboy costume. And I can't help but assume that that was a purposeful omission. And then I think for me, probably the most important evidence is the fact that Doomsday Clock makes such a big point about reinstating Clark as Superboy. So clearly he hadn't been at that point, and then Doomsday Clock restored that. Now, I know the canonicity of Doomsday Clock has been argued and might be somewhat nebulous, but I do hold to it. So for those reasons, I stand by what I've been saying through all of this, that Clark as Superboy was erased twice. First with Byrne's Man of Steel reboot, and then again with the New 52. But my thanks to Craig for making the case for it, and it definitely provided fodder for a great email exchange between the two of us and really got me thinking. So I wanted to give a shout out to Craig as well. And last but certainly not least, I heard from a couple of the Uber Legion fans out there, specifically Martin Gray and Adam Crouch. One of the questions we posed in an earlier episode was, which iteration of the Legion were we dealing with in the New 52 and then the Bendis era? And what both Martin and Adam were able to confirm, and I greatly appreciate this, is that the New 52 iteration of the Legion was essentially the retro boot version that we were dealing with prior to the New 52. So, right, we talked about how we have the pre-Crisis version, and that's what Jeff Johns reintroduced in the post-Infinite Crisis landscape. That was known as the retro boot team. And so essentially, as I gather from these two gentlemen, that's the version of the team that we were more or less following in the New 52. The Bendis version, however, was its own thing, not surprisingly. And then Adam also reminded me of something that I remember coming across and clocking at the time, but I had totally forgotten about it, which was in Flashpoint Beyond, which we did a whole episode on. Batman is standing in front of that blackboard with all the writing, and there are hints at potential future storylines and things like that. And a lot of it is obscured, but you can clearly see that it's starting to spell out Legion of 4 worlds, right? So we talked about Final Crisis, Legion of 3 worlds. It seems like there's at least a hint. I don't know if this will ever come to pass or if this was just kind of a little bit of an Easter egg or I don't know what. But essentially the idea of a Legion of 4 worlds story that would take the retro boot team, the post 0 hour reboot team, and the Mark Waid 3-boot version and the Bendis version and give us a Legion of 3 Worlds-esque story, but with all 4 versions. I don't know, but I had forgotten about that, and I'm grateful to Adam for reminding me. And finally, even more recently, I know Jeff Johns has been writing a 12-issue Justice Society of America maxi series. I have not read any of it yet. I'm waiting until the whole thing is done, and then I will plow through the entire story. But I am aware that in recent issues towards the end, he did reintroduce his retro boot version of the Legion. So that version of the team, this is my understanding, right? That we spent so much time talking about in the Jeff Johns Legion trilogy, right? Lightning Saga and Superman and the Legion of Superheroes, Legion of Three Worlds. Like that version of the team is what he's playing with again in the Justice Society book. So again, that's another area. We'll keep an eye on it. We'll talk about that in some way, shape, or form. It might be a Patreon thing or something like that. And generally speaking, I would say, don't be surprised if we do some more dedicated Legion coverage at some point. My interest in the team and its various permutations has definitely grown a lot over the course of doing these episodes. So, like I said, I just wanted to start by offering those updates. And I want to give a shout out again to Rick, Martin, Adam, and Craig for reaching out and sharing their takes and their insight. And now let's do a little Red Skies segment here, because I do want to speak about the 0 Hour 30th anniversary special just published by DC Comics. Now, weirdly, and I don't have a reason or an explanation for this, but the physical copy arrived in stores during the last week of August, but the digital copy is not arriving online until the first week of September. Normally, they release at the same time, so I'm not quite sure why the digital release was delayed, but in any event, special shout out to Sean Hendricks of Fat Moose Comics in Whippany, New Jersey. You hear the ads for Fat Moose in every episode, but I really want to give a special personalized shout out here because I messaged Sean on Wednesday last week when the book released. And I know never bother a comics retailer on Wednesday. And I began my message by saying, don't respond right away. It's okay. But I said, hey, I could really use a copy of the 0 Hour special if you have any left over. Right? I try to be very delicate in my approach because I know what it's like to be behind the counter and have a lot going on New Comic Book Day. But he got right back to me. He got it right out in the mail. And I swear within the next couple of days, it was there on my doorstep. And it's because of him that I'm able to record this segment about the 0 Hour special. So shout out to Sean. If you are in the New Jersey area or thereabouts, be sure to stop in. Tell him Anthony from Digging for Kryptonite sent you. And if you're not in the area, go to the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. And if there's something that you're looking for, reach out and they might be able to help you out with that. So my thanks once again to Sean of Fat Moose Comics. So the 0 Hour special, $10, 80 pages, very much in line with the Death of Superman 30th anniversary special and the Return of Superman 30th anniversary special that we saw over the past 2 years. All three specials, of course, feature major contributions from Dan Jurgens. He's the common denominator across all three of these. I love the fact that DC is recognizing and celebrating these anniversaries with these productions the way they have been. It's really cool. It makes me feel so old, but I'm glad that they're doing it. And this one in particular, co-written by Ron Marz and Dan Jurgens, they don't specify who wrote which chapters. It feels totally seamless throughout the book. We do have a host of art teams who trade off duties throughout the book. There too, you can certainly recognize the shift in art team, but to me at least, it never felt jarring. And the shift in team essentially always coincided with the book shifting its focus in terms of setting or character. So again, it felt like a natural change up as you were making your way through. I would say the main way, just in terms of the format of the book, that this differed from the Superman specials I referenced before is that there you had interconnected stories. Here, it's one continuous 80-page narrative where we follow Green Lantern Kyle Rayner on his journey to this alternate reality. Now, I'm a huge Kyle Rayner fan, so I was thrilled with that. And B, you guys know, when we talk about these crisis level events, one of the things I always bemoan is the lack of a point of view character who we can really follow, whose perspective we see throughout the story. I really feel like having a POV character, while not essential for these stories, and I recognize that part of the fun of these stories is just the wide scope and having so many characters. But for me, having a point of view character just kind of helps ground these larger than life situations in some emotion. So I always love that. So that was a highlight of the book for me, for sure. And again, that definitely was one way that set it apart from the Superman anniversary specials I referenced before. Now, as far as 0 Hour itself, certainly we covered 0 Hour in depth. We had a whole episode about it when we did our Red Skies event a while back. 0 Hour is one of those stories that I have a lot of love and fondness for, but it's more nostalgia driven, I think, than anything else, as opposed to events that would follow it, like The Final Night or DC 1 Million, where yes, there's nostalgia wrapped up in that too, just because I was a kid and it was a formative time for me reading. And I just have those memories of seeing the books on the stand and the trade dress and the logos and all of that, right? That's all going on with all of these events. But in revisiting Final Night and in revisiting 1 Million in recent years, to me, I felt like they held up in a more powerful way, and I felt like there was more I could sink my teeth into. Whereas when I went back to Zero Hour, again, a lot of the enjoyment that I was able to glean from it, I think stemmed from just those warm memories of seeing, again, the logo, the house ads, all of that at the time. Zero Hour to me was also kind of a rare instance where I feel, and you might disagree, but I feel like the tie-in issues and those follow-up Zero issues back in the day, those to me were the highlight more so than that core 5-issue weekly miniseries. So again, my mileage on the actual core Zero Hour miniseries has always been fairly limited, but I love the event overall. And like I said, it hit at a formative time in my fandom when I was still so early on in this journey. Now, one thing in fairness that I think is kind of an inherent roadblock in my enjoying the original Zero Hour is that, or at least getting as much out of it as other people, is that I read it after it was collected. And who's there, right smack on the cover of that trade paperback, but Parallax, Hal Jordan Parallax. And so I went into that story knowing who the big bad was going to be. And I can very much recognize, and I know I've said this before, but it bears repeating, that I am sure had I been reading that miniseries as it was coming out, that reveal that it was Hal who was the one who was trying to rewrite reality would have really packed a punch. So for everyone who had such a strong reaction to it and it really kind of imprinted on them, I'm sure that had a lot to do with it. And I just recognized that just wasn't part of my experience. Still, though, I was very happy to revisit the world of Zero Hour for this special. Now, I'm not going to do a point-by-point plot recap of this. There are plenty of synopses out there that you can read. If not, read the actual book itself, which I do genuinely recommend, particularly if you have love for the original Zero Hour and or for Kyle Rayner Green Lantern. And if the answer is both, then you're really going to be in your glory with this. But if either or both of those really speaks to you, I think you'll get something out of this. If not, but you just enjoy the idea of an alternate reality type storyline, you still might enjoy it. But I think this is really the sweet spot for this story. I think would be Zero Hour fans, Kyle fans, just fans of this era generally, the mid 90s in DC Comics. So again, I'm not going to run through the entire thing, but the overall premise is that Green Lantern Kyle Rayner is pulled into an alternate reality by a different version of Wally West, and this reality is on the brink of annihilation. It is facing the same threat, essentially, that the DCU faced in the original Zero Hour, where you have these waves of entropy moving forward from the beginning of time and moving backward from the end of time, erasing everything in its path and converging in the present. A couple of things that I want to mention. One is that, like I said, couldn't be happier to see Kyle in this and to see Kyle be the central figure. I got to give a lot of credit to Ron Marz, who of course created Kyle Rayner with Darryl Banks, who is the first artistic contributor here. But credit to the writers here, Ron Marz and Dan Jurgens, because I think it would have been very easy to write Kyle Rayner in 1994. They're writing the present day modern DCU version of Kyle, and I felt like I saw that on the page. He felt more confident, more self-assured than certainly he was back in the day when he had just assumed the mantle as the torchbearer, the sole remaining Green Lantern. So I appreciated that their characterization of Kyle, I think, really reflected where he is now. So I thought that was a cool touch. So the next major piece that really struck me was just the setup of this alternate reality itself. Now, not to nitpick, I do feel like Kyle Rayner, who's been through a lot and he's seen different realities and the multiverse and different dimensions and all that, I feel like he would have been a little quicker on the uptake that this was not his reality and that these people don't know him. I feel like it took him quite a ways into the book before he got his bearings, but that's okay. We go along for the ride, and sort of Kyle's confusion becomes our own as well, and we experience this with him, so it's all good. But it's a really intriguing setup. This is a world where Superman died fighting Doomsday, but never came back. And Supergirl took over as protector of Metropolis in a black costume. Now, it's never explicitly said that this is the Matrix version of Supergirl, but given the time period that they're playing with here, the creators involved, I like to think, and I have to assume that's the version of Supergirl. And there's even one page deep into the book where Supergirl goes to Lex for counsel. And this is more the later 90s Lex, where he's once again bald and pretty buff. But nothing is said explicitly, yet you do get the sense that there is a history between the two of them. And of course, Triangle era fans will remember that the Matrix Supergirl did have a romantic relationship with Lex Luthor II, who was actually the original Lex in a cloned body posing as his own son. It was a crazy time. So that's sort of the Superman side of it. In Gotham, Batman was broken fighting Bane, but never healed. He's still alive, but hides out in Wayne Manor in his wheelchair with Ace the Bat Hound. Batgirl has taken over as protector of the city. Azrael is in play as well. Dick Grayson appears to be the commissioner. He's not seen, but he is referenced. And moving forward, we have Donna Troy as Wonder Woman, Connor Hawke as Green Arrow, Guy Gardner is there, Jack Knight, Starman, Obsidian. So the idea of legacy, I think, really permeates the story. And as a fan of most of those characters and of that era generally, I was happy to see that. But again, I think just bigger picture, this notion of a Superman who never came back after fighting Doomsday, Bruce Wayne who never healed. Like, it's an interesting setup because it really takes those iconic 90s storylines. And we recognize that most of DC's major characters had a version of that, right? The death of Superman, Nightfall, Emerald Twilight, the contest with Wonder Woman, on and on, the death of Oliver Queen. So to kind of take those stories, but remove the undoing of them, right? And let them stand and kind of see what the DCU would look like. And you know what it made me think of? It reminded me of Infinite Crisis, something we talked about, where when Alexander Luthor was bringing back the multiverse and sifting through the different Earths and trying to create the perfect one, he had abducted representatives of different Earths and strung them up on the tower. And he had this whole explanation about how, had the original multiverse been allowed to continue, that Earth 8, I think it was 8, would have been home to the legacy characters like Kyle Rayner and Connor Hawke. So in this story here, to see a reality populated with those legacy characters, that's what it made me think of. So it was a cool, I assume, unintentional connection point, but I really did like that. Now, ultimately, what you find out here, spoiler alert, is that this reality that Kyle finds himself in is a quote-unquote splinterverse, or a pocket universe, a term that we're familiar with here. And long story short, what we find out is that at the climax of the original Zero Hour, that Parallax was able to create this splinter or shadow of himself, and that splinter was able to carve up a tiny piece of time and create this pocket universe there, this reality of his own making that he could lord over. But that it took a tremendous amount of power to create and sustain this, and that power has run out. And that's why now this entire pocket universe is collapsing. And so the splinter version of Parallax, who's using the Fatal Five to do his bidding, his whole plan is to take Kyle's ring and use that power source to divert the entropy from his pocket universe back to Kyle's universe and beyond, right? The idea is that eventually it would consume the entire multiverse. And so what the emotional crux of this becomes is the heroes of the pocket universe sacrificing themselves, recognizing that this tiny, tiny pocket universe represents just a fraction of the lives that would be lost compared to if Kyle's universe and multiverse were destroyed. And it's a tough pill for them to swallow, and they don't get there immediately, understandably so. The one who really, I think, is able to see the light first and help turn the tide is Donna Troy. And of course, in the mainline DCU, Kyle and Donna had this relationship. And of course, Kyle is aware of that, but this is a different version of Donna. Yet, even dealing with different versions, there's still that connection there, which was interesting. And so I think she's the one who kind of comes around on this first, and eventually the others do as well. Kyle, for his part, tries to save everybody, right? Ever the hero. But in the end, there's just not enough time. And Wave Rider, our beloved Wave Rider from the Linear Men, he, of course, pops up, provides some necessary exposition, and ultimately plucks Kyle from this pocket universe before it is completely wiped out. Well, I say completely, but we do get a little tease in the final page, which I won't spoil here, But there's a hint of a threat that came back from the Pocket Universe that might plague the DCU in the months or years to come. I guess we'll find out. But that's the gist of the 0 Hour 30th anniversary special. Like I said, we have a number of teams sharing the art duties on this. I just want to highlight a couple of them. Kicking us off, we have Darryl Banks. Always great to see him drawing Kyle Rayner, Green Lantern. You've got Dan Jurgens drawing the final chapter in the story, which includes his creation, Wave Rider. So that's always a treat. Howard Porter's in there. I love Howard Porter's art going back to the JLA and Flash days. Here, it appears he's inking himself, and it looks quite different. It's not quite the Howard Porter that I'm more accustomed to and that I really love, but it was cool to see him in here as well. I also got to say, anytime Tom Grummett is there, I'm very happy. I love his art. I think he's such an underrated artist. So it was a real treat to see him grace these pages as well. So overall, I dug this a lot. I mean, again, as someone who doesn't sort of worship at the altar of the original 0 Hour, I was able to just kind of get into this story. I think if you are a fan, it honors the original. It doesn't take anything away from it. If your enthusiasm for the original is maybe slightly more muted, like myself, I think this works in and of itself. And certainly if you are a fan of Kyle Rayner, Green Lantern, it's just great to see him get the spotlight and carry the story. So again, I'm glad I picked this up. My thanks once again to Sean of Fat Moose. And I just wanted to spend a few minutes talking about it. This is a rarity for the podcast. A first, I think, where I did a bit of a solo segment here, but this came together very last minute. And I just wanted to add this to this episode since it is so timely. And I hope that people enjoyed this discussion here. Now, back to Superboy. Next week, we are kicking off The Trials of Smallville, a 7-episode saga, years in the making, where we will be going deep on the decade-long television series that cemented my Superman fandom and remains in my heart my favorite interpretation of the legend. We're going to be tackling Smallville sort of mixtape style like we've done before. We're going to kick things off with a 2-parter where I'll be joined by Zach Moore from Always Hold On to Smallville, and we are going to share our journeys as Smallville fans, what the show has meant to us personally over all these years, ways that it's influenced us personally. And then we are also going to chart Clark's physical and emotional journey over the course of the series. So that's the first 2 episodes of the event. We're also going to have episodes on the romantic relationships of the series, Lex's downfall, the show's adaptations of the heroes of the DC Universe, its adaptations of the villains of the DC Universe, and we're going to wrap it all up by counting down our top 10 favorite episodes of the series. So that's our 7-episode Trials of Smallville event. I have been waiting for years to do this. I can say I've already recorded the first couple. I am having an absolute blast. I've been rewatching a ton of Smallville, and what can I say? I just can't wait to start sharing these episodes with you guys. So that's starting up next week. This week, though, we are returning to the world of the Filmation Superboy cartoons. Previously, we talked about them generally, and we looked at a very small selection of episodes, but now we're back to dive into all 34 segments. It's a really fun one. If you have any interest in those Filmation Superboy shorts, whether you've seen them or not, and given how rare they are, you probably haven't, it's a really fun conversation with Superman cosplayer Daniel Sanchez. We'll be right back with that discussion after this break. Filmmakers and movie fans alike should be sure to attend these film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, Point Lookout on Long Island, and Round Reel in Bloomfield, New Jersey. Take it from an alum of 2 of them. Submission information for filmmakers, as well as details about the festivals, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news about events, discounts, tickets, and more. Also, listen to the Hang On to Your Shorts and Cullen on Film podcasts, available via a shared universe network. We reference the television series Smallville a lot around here, and there's one Smallville rewatch podcast that's always at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring tremendous insight, passion, and humor as they discuss each and every episode of the series that ushered in the renaissance of superhero TV. Listen to Always Hold On to Smallville wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows under the Always Hold On to banner, including Arrow, DC's Legends of Tomorrow, Superman and Lois, and Star Wars. And now, joining me to discuss the entire series of Filmation Superboy cartoons is Wearing the Cape cosplayer and returning guest, Daniel Sanchez. Welcome back.
And joining him at the Hall of Desiato. Thank you. This is a true pleasure. I'm so glad you asked me to do this. I grew up in this era. These are my childhood memories, and this felt like coming home.
I can't wait to get your take on all of this. As a fan, as someone who grew up watching these, as an artist yourself, I'm really, really keen to hear what you have to say about all of this. And to our audience, you might be getting a sense of deja vu, but don't worry. We did cover, to some extent, the Filmation Superboy cartoons a little while back, earlier on in our Superboy coverage. And at the time, a big part of that discussion was the lack of commercial availability of these 34 6-minute segments. And at the time, all that I was able to watch was about the first dozen or so. There's an hour-long compilation that I found on YouTube, and that's what I watched, and that mostly formed the basis of our conversation. I can't reveal my sources, but after that episode came out, I might have gotten an email in my inbox with everything, and to the person who was responsible for that, thank you, and you know who you are. And I will once again reiterate that if and when these come out on a Blu-ray or any other physical or digital media, I will happily pay for these, and I would love to see these widely available and commercially available because they deserve to be seen. But once I had access to all of them, I said, oh, it would be kind of curious, kind of interesting to sit through them and discuss them and have a more in-depth conversation. And that's why we're here. And you jumped out as the person to ask to do this, because you shared, again, your history with these. So I guess kind of on that note, can you take me back to when you're a kid and watching these and just what the experience was like?
Oh yeah, I mean, this totally transported me there. Like it or not, I was kidnapped into the nostalgic, warm blanket of seeing these as a kid. So for context, I was born in 1968. So I was on the planet while these cartoons were in first run. They'd been out for 2 years and were still going strong. I saw them. I started to see them when I was about 4 years old. So that would have been 72. And by then, some other cartoons had come out. So it really was sort of a golden age. The mid 60s, this mod style of doing cartoons where the jazzy theme songs were just classics. The original Spider-Man, the Jetsons, Johnny Quest. I mean, Space Ghost. So many of these cartoons had just this energy that would just sort of grip you from the opening animation scene of something that was going on, that was exciting and thrilling, and you wished that you were a part of it. So you couldn't not be hooked. Also, this was a period of my life where we had moved to America from Panama. So Spanish was my first language. And part of my learning English was watching Saturday morning cartoons, Sesame Street, etc. And so I have a wide range of forgiveness for some of the simplistic dialogue and the overly whittled down concepts to make things very, very easy to understand, because I was also learning a new language. So in a sense, I really appreciated the fact that these were very much for a young child. I would say ages 4 to 8 would probably be about this range. And I also had a small white dog. And so to have this show be about a boy and his dog who had come from somewhere else, and they were now doing their best to be good. I think it was the perfect show for me at the perfect time. And luckily it was cool, and my friends thought it was cool. So anytime we wanted to talk about these shows, it was cool.
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, I don't want to duplicate what I said in that other episode too much, but again, with Filmation generally, but especially these Superboy shorts. And again, there were 34 of them in total, approximately 6 minutes in length, and they aired as part of various Filmation Superman adventure shows from 66 to 69 originally. But yes, they are simple in terms of the dialogue and the narrative and the animation itself. There's relatively limited movement and a lot of reused animation, but there's a charm to them, and the runtime I found to be a godsend because they're mercifully short. And it's funny because when you look at all the stuff that we consume and we talk about all the time, most of them fit into a relatively small number of formats. We have our half-hour shows, our hour shows, and our 2+ hour movies. To have something that's a little bit of a different model here, it was just kind of interesting. And again, especially if we are talking about simpler stories and simpler animation, I think were these to be stretched to a half hour, that would probably, to me, I think would be pushing it. So I think these were the exact appropriate runtime where they hold your interest more or less for those few minutes. And I thought they worked great. I really had a lot of fun watching these. Now, had I not procrastinated as much, I probably would have spread these out over a few more nights. I ended up watching these over like 2 nights. And I will admit, back to back to back, they did get a bit repetitive at a certain point, but still a lot of fun. I really had a good time with them.
Yeah, I'm so glad you did. And you're absolutely right that they have a charm to them. They're of a time, and they have an innocence and they have a purity that also, fit even more because they was part of a variety show where during that half hour, you did not only get Superboy, you got other things. So an adventure of Superboy going to another planet and having his first encounter with a red sun was probably very, very different than the 5-minute short that came before that had a whole other character. So you did get to have that extra layer of excitement about, oh, this is totally new than what I just saw 10 minutes ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And they are so faithful to the comics of the day. There are these Smallville set stories. You've got Clark in his red sweater at Smallville High and at the Kent General Store. Monpod don't have a huge presence. They didn't have a huge presence in the comics as we've discovered in our conversations, but they're there. Lana's there. Crypto, of course. I mean, these two are two peas in a pod in all of these shorts. It's Superboy and Crypto. I would say the only things that are missing from the comics, and not even to the cartoon's detriment, but just in terms of what they took and what they didn't, we don't get any of the comic book villains. We don't have Lex. We don't have Kryptonite Kid or Bizarro Superboy. We don't have Legion of Superheroes, which that probably would have been maybe a bit too much for what they were aiming for here. Although, interestingly, I think it's the penultimate segment here where Superboy goes to the far future. He goes like 1,000 years to the future to find this super molecule. And, yes. And I knew from my research the Legion wasn't in this, but for a moment there, I was like, wait a minute. Like, are they going to do the Legion or just reference the Legion? So they actually had an opening if they wanted to, but they didn't. So we don't get those villains. We don't get the Legion of Superheroes. And this was the one that was most curious to me. We don't get Pete Ross. And I only say it's curious because there are a few instances where Clark is with a classmate before he has to run off. And there's at least one instance where it's a blonde classmate. And I mean, I guess we can maybe assume that was Pete, but I was just waiting for him to be like, I got to go, Pete. But like, he never names the classmate. But again, other than those few omissions, again, they really feel like the comics of the day in terms of just the tone and the trappings of the comics translated to the screen. I mean, how did you feel?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it was as if this was a tie-in series where there would be no gap between going to the local drugstore and picking up your Superboy comic and then watching an adventure on Saturday morning. In these cartoons, we get Professor Lang, we get a lot of what we just know as canon from those 15-cent Superboy comics, which, by the way, Superboy was my first comic that I ever owned as a child. And it was this amazing cover, which I don't know if it was Neil Adams, but it sure looked that level of quality, where they're dragging Aquaboy out of the water because he's been covered by oil. And it was the first appearance of Aquaboy, and Superboy's trying to save him. And that is what got me hooked on the medium of physical comic books, was that rescue scene of Aquaboy being pulled out of the water, knowing full well both of these two would grow up and be in the Super Friends. But this whole idea that these were the adventures before the adventures was just mind-blowing to me at the time. And we talked about this, I think, on the first episode I ever guested with you, where you weren't entirely sold on the concept of Superboy at that time, and you asked me what my I guess take and appreciation for it was, and I said it's because he'll grow up to be Superman. He ends up learning all the right things. So as a boy, when you watch him make a mistake in judgment, or maybe he wasn't that smart about something, but he one day will be, then it lets you know it's okay if you stumble every now and then, because you could have that same confidence that one day you will turn out as well as he did. So these adventures were very reassuring and reaffirming of it's okay to just be a boy and do your best.
Now, circling back to these Filmation shorts, Daniel, I was today years old when I realized that 32 years, if my math is right, before Lana Lang wore her kryptonite necklace on Smallville, Filmation Lana Lang in the final Filmation short wore a kryptonite necklace. It blew my mind.
Yes. Season 3, episode 8, the last one they ever made. Lana wears the necklace, and Clark falls in front of her. So knowing that was where this series ended and where Smallville began, the last episode of this, the first episode of that, what a symmetry.
Yeah, the great kryptonite caper. It's one of those things, and I don't say this to knock the Smallville creators, but I could be totally wrong. I doubt but I don't know, maybe they grew up watching this. They had some vague memory of it, or someone mentioned it to them. I don't know. But my gut is that this was not a direct reference, but rather it's like this was just something that's out there. Someone was asking me this, and I actually don't have the answer. Do you have any recollection of Lana in a kryptonite necklace in the comics ever?
Not personally, no.
Yeah. Folks, audience, if you're out there and you have an instance that comes to mind, like, please let me know. Otherwise, this seems to be, as far as we know, the only precursor to then what we would see on Smallville. But it's just wild. But it's like, whether it was a direct reference, which I highly doubt, or if it's just a coincidence, or just this idea that's out there in the Superman mythology that has taken on this life of its own and cemented in the minds of the creators of Smallville. I don't know, but it was crazy. Like, just to see these connection points, intended or otherwise, is amazing.
Right. And to have that not just be a throwaway moment, the whole episode was based on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I would be more comforted if they were independent ideas, because that would mean that some of these surrounding concepts are just in the zeitgeist, and that we're living and breathing and standing on them, and anybody at any time can say, I've got an idea. And the fact that you also had it, I think, makes it even more wonderful. Season 2, episode 1 opens with the Kent farm yellow, and it looks like the Smallville TV show Kent farm. Now, in other episodes, the house is white, sometimes it's brown, but I got a little bit of a goosebump thrill when I got to see this series again, and first episode, second season. I'm like, there it is. There's the quote, the real Kent house.
Yeah. Now, you shared with me, and I didn't, just so the audience knows, I didn't ask you to do this. I didn't put this level of homework on you, but you took it upon yourself. You made a chart, right? Tracking character appearances and the premise of episodes, right? I guess my question is, what sort of categories did you find most of these episodes fell into? Like evil scientist, alien, like was that kind of what you were tracking in part?
That is exactly what I was tracking. And the reason that I did it is because I knew what I remembered as a kid. And I knew that in talking to you, I was going to describe this series as a science fiction action adventure show. So not that far removed from a Johnny Quest. You're going to exciting places that are all over the world. In Superboy's case, they can even be other planets. You, like Johnny Quest, have a dog. So Johnny's dog was Bandit. Superboy's dog is Crypto. In 34 episodes, there was only one that didn't have Crypto in it. So it was always the two of them. And I wanted to see did I remember right? How many of them were aliens? How many of them were, Lana trying to figure out who he was? So basically, here's the quick breakdown. First of all, in 28 episodes, Superboy says "up, up, and away." So we've got that that established. 15 episodes had either an evil weapon or an invention that got way out of control and posed a danger. 15. That's basically half of the total number of episodes. In 13 episodes, Krypto is the hero. He is either the main hero or he was equal. Sometimes he saved Superboy's life. 12 episodes had low-level gangsters and robbers who were usually of low-level intelligence. 11 episodes had some sort of trouble alert, some radio signal that would let Superboy know that something was happening, or he and Pa would just be listening to the radio. Sometimes Clark had a radio in his bedroom and he was just listening to it. In 11 episodes, at the end of the episode, Krypto turns to the camera and winks, which has its own charm. Mm-hmm. Growing up on the George Reeves show, if we all know that Clark always winks. So he only beats Clark by 1. Clark winks 10 times. There are 10 episodes with bad aliens, 9 episodes with Pa Kent, 9 with the good scientist, who sometimes has an invention go drastically wrong and pose a danger. There's 9 episodes where the antagonist is nature, a volcano, a water spout, a storm, a sun shooting out too many rays. There are 8 episodes where he goes to space. There are 7 with Lana Lang, which was much more than I remembered. She starts out really in his corner and then becomes more and more suspicious over time, which at least they had a chronological growth for her. 7 episodes had good aliens. In 5 episodes, Clark's identity is threatened, which is a direct subcategory to that there are 7 Lana Lang episodes. There are 5 episodes with Kryptonite. There are 4 episodes with an evil scientist. So more often than not, it's a good scientist who's something got out of his hands. Ma Kent, in contrast to the 9 that Pa Kent was in, Ma is only in 3 of them, and she only speaks in 2 of them.
And the only thing she says is, "You're going to be late.
You're going to be late for school."
Yeah.
Right. In 1, you see the back of her head while Pa Kent reads a newspaper and has his line. This surprised me. There were only 3 alien invasions.
Oh, yeah.
You
would expect more, yeah.
You would expect much, much more. There were only 2 with robots.
Or robots.
Robots. And of the things that there were 2 of, there are only 2 that have time travel. And there were 2 aliens who claimed to be from Krypton with powers, but were actually trying to pull one over on Superboy. Only 1 episode with magic. 1 episode with Professor Lang. And 1 episode reference to Metropolis.
Right on. I thank you so much for doing that. Honestly, it's such a big help to me as host, because I think you've given a great, for people who haven't watched these, and I think that's probably a fair number of people listening to this, especially given how rare they are to even find. So I think through that list and your categorization, you've given folks a very good overview of the kinds of stories that we're talking about. And we'll get more specific and share our favorites and what stood out and all of that. But as far as that like high level overview, I think that was great. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I was blown away because in my mind, I remember so many more alien battles and robots but still the series as a whole, I appreciated that they tried different things.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a good variety there. I watched because I have the Filmation Superman DVDs. Those thankfully were released. And there's a featurette on the season 1 set, and fellow podcaster Michael Bailey, shout out to him, he kind of tipped me off to this, and I watched it. And I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it features interviews with at least one of the Filmation folks and Mark Waid and Paul Levitz. and they talk about Filmation generally. Are you familiar with the history of that animation studio at all?
No, I'd love to hear it.
Just what stood out was most fascinating about this, and they talk about it in the featurette, is that in the early 60s, there was these three guys who formed the studio, and it was really this fledgling animation house. And you flash forward a few years, they're trying to get the Superman license, and these Superman executives, including Mort Weisinger, right? They wanted to see the studio, but apparently it was just these few guys and a bunch of empty desks. So in advance of the DC inspection, so to speak, they filled it with family and friends and like whoever they could grab. And so essentially built this whole animation house and the DC projects in particular, like on the back of this ruse. And one of the founders who's interviewed on the DVD talks about how eventually he revealed this to, he didn't name the person. I suspect it was Mort Weisinger or some other executive at DC. And the guy was like, yeah, he was not happy when they revealed that. But it's just amazing to think how this all came to be. So that really stood out.
I'm even more impressed with what they did then.
Yeah. The other thing that jumped out at me in those interviews, it was something Mark Waid said that really made me laugh. And then I couldn't not think of this when I was watching the shorts. And he was purposeful in saying that he didn't mean this as a knock on Filmation, but he's like, it really felt like an outgrowth of radio where you had the narration, not only the narration, but often through the narration and or the dialogue, what was happening on screen visually was being told to you as well. He's like, to the point where I think you could watch these with your eyes closed or watch them with no picture and you still get the whole story. And I didn't fully test it, but there were definitely points where I was like, oh yeah, like you kind of could, but like kind of in keeping with the comics of the day too. I mean, how many times would you have a comic book panel where it's like the caption is telling you what's happening while the character is saying or thinking what's happening? It's like reinforcing the action all the time.
Absolutely. And that's part of that Silver Age charm. This was such a direct translation from that vernacular that we were all so used to. One of my favorite opening lines, and I think the audience should appreciate the fact that the very first thing you hear on the very first episode is the voice of Ted Knight. So anyone who grew up on the Super Friends and who knows in their head the voice and what it sounds like that says, "Meanwhile, at the Hall of Justice," that's Ted Knight. And he did the over narration for these. One of my favorite lines is episode 1 in the 3rd season. Far out in space, an exploding asteroid sends fiery fragments hurtling towards planet Earth. And that's exactly what you see. But they put so many action verbs in this narration that it adds to that crackle that as a kid you appreciate. As an adult going back and upon rewatch, you realize they pack the entire setup in the first 20 or 30 seconds. They give you everything you need to know. It is verbally the starting gun.
No, absolutely. I have to say I recognize these segments for what they are and what their intended audience was and what their aspirations were. So I'm not here to overly analyze them or pick them apart. But I will say the ones that stood out to me the most, that were most enjoyable and probably most memorable, were the ones where the stakes were more personal, where Superboy lost his eyesight, where Krypto lost his memory. That episode, I think it's called Forget Me Not, Superdog. It's like a takeoff on Panic in the Sky from Adventures of Superman. I mean, it's crazy where there's this kryptonite asteroid, and this time it's Krypto instead of Superboy, who loses his memory. And of course he gets it back in an explosion later on, but shades of Panic in the Sky, which of course would later be adapted in an episode of the live action Superboy TV show and Lois and Clark as well. And I was not expecting it to pop up here in any way. So that one stood out. And then ones where, and you mentioned this is one of your categories, where Superboy's identity is threatened. I mean, I think the one where Clark and Lana are trapped by the gorilla gang in the cave, and he has to try to get them out without revealing himself. Those were the ones, as well as there were a couple that were like unhinged is the word that past guest Dan Greenfield used, and I think that was an apt choice of word there. So there were a couple unhinged ones that were like really kind of out there, but otherwise, I think the ones where the stakes were a bit more personal, those were the ones I enjoyed the most, as opposed to mere kind of physical danger or physical suspense. There were a few instances where I thought there might be kind of a clever twist where, and I could pull up the episode title, but one where there are aliens who were pursuing fugitives, and Superboy kind of got in the way, but then he helped them catch the bad guys. And as I'm watching it, I'm like, oh, it would be an interesting twist if the aliens who claim that they're law enforcement are actually the bad guys. Like, that would be a clever twist, and also a good lesson of like, listen, you have to, you can't be too trusting either, kids.
Right.
But it didn't go that way. Like, it was just played totally straight. And there were at least a couple of others where I thought there might be some sort of pulling the rug out. It's like, oh, we're talking about something else. And it wasn't. So there were a few I felt missed opportunities. But otherwise, again, the personal ones, those were the ones I liked the most.
Well, we did have a couple of those aliens who lie to Superboy about who they are.
That's true.
So in the first season, there was an alien who claimed to be from Krypton, only his father rocketed him to a different planet, where on that planet he also had superpowers, and now he was here. But his real goal is to use advanced technology and steal Superboy's powers, because he has none of his own, so he's going to take Superboy's. But Superboy notices that there's a scar on his hand, and had he had superpowers since he was a baby, chances are that is his giveaway that he's lying. So every now and then we do have some of those, but I think the writers were mindful not to lose a small child trying to follow the narrative thread.
No, I mean, again, that's totally fair. And also too, no, you're right. I mean, there are some nefarious aliens, and then some aliens who are friendly and are allies. And I think it's good to have that mix. I mean, there's the one, it's called Space Refugees, I think, or something like that, where they don't beat you over the head with it, but there's a moral message there about taking in people who need a home, right? Because you have these aliens who are seeking refuge on Earth, and you have this gang of guys who are trying to get rid of them, in part because they have their stolen loot that they're trying to reclaim. But also there is this prevailing sense of like, we don't want them here, the outsider sort of thing. And Superboy has this whole bit about like, they need a home, like we should take them in. So
yeah. And a lot of times, maybe not so much as the original Star Trek, which also debuted in 1966, the same year that this debuted, with the social messages. But as a child, you don't need much to learn something, because everything is new to you. The entire world is new to you. And so in some cases, there were lessons that you would learn on this cartoon that were the first time you'd encountered that message. So that episode you referenced in particular, the main local yokel bad guy is literally wearing a cowboy hat and saying, we don't want no aliens living around here. Now, that's a fairly subdued way of putting in a social message of, what life in the mid 60s was like. But, kudos that they put it in at that level. And when it's bigotry towards, green-skinned aliens, you're making the point without making the point, which was of the time.
No, totally. We mentioned that one episode that felt like a takeoff on Panic in the Sky from Adventures of Superman. And of course, we talked about Lana's kryptonite necklace. There's also another one, Operation Counter Invasion. That's where you do have alien invaders. And Superboy kind of inserts himself and gets the United States military to stand down to give him time to try to handle the situation. And the reason why that stood out, Superboy's ploy, ultimately is to convince the aliens that everyone on Earth has powers like he has, right? Like, you guys got better back down because we're all like this. And it really stood out because, and we talked about this when we looked at that unaired live action Superboy pilot from 1961, and we talked about the written but unfilmed scripts. And one of those scripts was almost exactly this, where the way he gets out of a situation with alien invaders is to convince them that everyone on planet Earth is just like him. So to see that play out here in animated form, I was like, oh, that's awesome. So again, and I wouldn't be surprised if, because those scripts were out there, so maybe that was a direct inspiration, or a la the necklace, just something that was kind of out there in the universe. But it was cool. It was cool to see that.
Maybe, but I still really applaud the fact that they had Superboy win because he was clever, that he used strategy, which is very much the reason that I love Superman 2, the theatrical cut of, he defeated Zod with strategy. And in this Superboy episode, you have these very cliche, yet again, green-skinned aliens who talk like you would expect, like, we are here to take over your planet. And apparently have done no recon whatsoever to know what humans are actually like. They'll just take this first one they meet at his word, but that's okay. We'll go with that. We'll go with that premise. But I do like a few things about that episode, and sort of it is an underlying current through a lot of these, is that Superboy treats every new encounter with the chance to be a friend. And this is no exception. He reaches out his hand and he says, let's be friends. And then the aliens talk amongst themselves and they say, Truck, you are the strongest. Go crush his hand. I will, my leader. And from that point, it's almost a Bugs Bunny cartoon of, well, Bugs tried to be nice. Of course, you realize this means war. And so there's a sense of humor about it, though, that reminded me a little bit of Christopher Reeve, with the bad vibrations and is something wrong with the elevator? When he dispatches these aliens, he's not vicious about it. He does it with just this calm demeanor of, we're going to basically play what to me is a game of tag, and I'm going to win, and then you're going to leave. And there's a moment where even Crypto gets in on the game because they've tried everything. They've tried various weapons, and they're like, well, he won't survive against our disintegrator ray. And there you get a straight, I don't know, chicken or the egg, but Superboy says, stop, it tickles. Now, we're all familiar with the famous comic book where Superman says it tickles. But what I loved about it was you got this disintegrator ray hitting Superboy in the chest, and he's just smiling like, oh, stop, it tickles. And Crypto is jumping in and out of the ray like a dog to a garden hose spout of water. He's playing in the disintegrator beam. And then he sits and scratches the back of his ear. And it's so comically perfect because even Crypto is in on the gag, and even he's bluffing like, oh, look at me. I'm bathing in it. So that gentleness, that even though he is pulling one over on these aliens, he's doing it with sort of that joy of a boy.
No, your point is very well taken. And just kind of continuing that thread of him leading with an open mind, an open heart, with friendship. Mm-hmm. When we get to the other instance of someone claiming to be from Krypton, but actually having nefarious purposes, the Mighty Lad episode in the third season, when Mighty Lad reveals himself, Mighty Lad is quick to say, well, you have competition now. And Superboy's like, no, like, I could really use your help. It got me. And it also made me laugh a bit, where it's like, again, we and Superboy obviously don't know yet that this guy's up to no good, but it's just kind of this notion of like, no, like there's a lot I need help with. Like, we don't need to be competitors. But just the fact, like, that's his initial instinct. I really liked a lot. I also want to say, I don't want to forget about this about Crypto. I'm very grateful and actually kind of surprised that the show refrained from having Crypto think or speak in a way that we, the audience, could understand, right? Because we've seen plenty of comics where we have Crypto's thought bubbles. And that, to me, I love Crypto, and my appreciation for Crypto has grown a lot. And I especially love him here, where they're really this duo, and they work together, and it's awesome. But I never liked Crypto's thought bubble. To me, that's just like a bridge too far. And so I like that because I wouldn't have been shocked if they had included something to that effect here, where you hear him thinking or something. And I'm really glad they didn't.
Yeah, I'm glad they didn't too. And it really reminded me, again, you know the era I grew up in. So Lassie was still on television, as was Rin Tin Tin. So they were both filmed in 1954, and we're still very much a part of Saturday television and after school television. And that's very much Lassie, where, you'd have little Timmy and Lassie would come up, bark, 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 bark. And Timmy would sort of work it out with him. Like, what are you trying to tell me? Oh, someone fell down a well, take me over there. So this crypto very much serves that same exposition launch pad where we get to hear Superboy say, here's what's going on, crypto. We have to go here and we have to stop that, or we have to find this. And because he's talking to crypto and it's a one-way conversation, it doesn't seem like it's fake exposition. It seems like he really is telling crypto a command. One thing I noticed throughout the series is that crypto understands very complex commands from Superboy. Like there are times where he'll say, crypto, you need to go find a sheet of lead to block the radiation. And crypto will go, Mark. And meanwhile, the opposite is not true. There were a couple of episodes where crypto was trying to tell Superboy something and Superboy was not getting the message. And at the end of the episode, he'd go, crypto, I should have listened to you. So there's one episode where a side character questions, like, how do they communicate? Is it some form of telepathy? And I thought that was interesting that one writer one time threw that in there. Is there something about the physiology of a Kryptonian dog that they maybe have more telepathy and can understand more? Interesting thought.
Yeah, no, very much so. Aw Yeah Comics celebrates and promotes everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations: Harrison, New York, aka my local comic shop, Skokie, Illinois, or Muncie, Indiana. If you have kids and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow Aw Yeah on social media for more. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw yeah. Creator and podcaster Perry Constantine, host of Superhero Cinephiles, has a special offer for listeners of this podcast. Visit percivalconstantine.com/DFK or click the link in the show notes. Fill out the form and then get 2 free novels and 1 free superhero short story. The novels are Vanguard, Heroes Forged, an Avengers-inspired team of superheroes, and Ronin Born, a cyberpunk superhero novel set in a futuristic, fascist Japan. The short story is Omega Knights, Fire and Lightning, a Power Rangers-inspired prequel to an upcoming serial. Take advantage of this offer today, and be sure to catch Superhero Cinephiles on all major podcast platforms. We could jump around a little bit. There are a couple of things that stood out, less so in terms of, substantial analysis and more just that made me laugh. One of them is the Hurricane Fighters episode. Mm-hmm. So to your point, there are some where it's just Superboy and Krypto up against the forces of nature. And so there's one where there's a hurricane while Clark and Lana and the class are on a field trip. And of course, Clark has to sneak away to become Superboy. And while Superboy and Krypto are trying to take care of the hurricane, we keep cutting back to Lana, or Lana, as this Clark calls her, expressing concern, like, where's Clark? Mm-hmm. And what made me laugh about this was her sounding board in these scenes is a fellow classmate who goes unnamed, who is quite the gloomy Gus. He doesn't do anything to try to make her feel better or offer any hope. She's like, where's Clark? And this guy's like, he must have gotten washed away. And then later on, like, I hope Clark's okay. He's like, I don't think anyone could survive that. Like something to that effect. And it was more than one instance. And I'm just like, bro, man, like you're really not helping matters here at all. I mean, I guess better that than trying to instill false hope. But it just, that one made me laugh.
Yeah, that one was really great. And that also had the Christopher Reeve Saves Air Force One precursor of the type of aircraft that was flying in the hurricane had the big dish on the top because it's a weather information gathering aircraft. And so it's not the president that's in the plane, but it's still lives that matter. And they look out the window to a plane that is no longer able to fly on its own. And there's Superboy under one wing flying it, not caring about anything other than saving their lives. And cue John Williams theme in that moment. But then what made it even more heartwarming is the other pilot looks out the other window and Krypto's doing the same thing. Like he's on the other wing, holding it up every bit as majestically with his own chin up and, listening to his own theme music in his head. And so they were very much a duo. You see many episodes where they're both handling an avalanche, or they're both digging a ditch so that the lava goes in it, or they're both catching multiple things at the same time. And I don't know how often the writers specifically said, well, let's do a situation that'd be really tough if he was alone. That way it makes, it more heartwarming if they do it together. But there was very much, they were a team.
Yeah, you really see Crypto's value in all of those rescues, 100%. The other one, or one of the other ones from the first season in particular that stood out was the revolt of Robotville, or as they continue to pronounce it in the episode, Robot. But what was funny there is, once again, right, we had a field trip and they're observing all of these machines, which then start to attack. And of course, it's the programmer who's behind all of this. But other than the pronunciation of robot, there's a scene where Clark and Lana are on the street and he has to get away from her. And he like full on shoves her out of the way. It was so forceful.
He shoved her into some sort of store, not into the street, but he basically, he had no time to make a decision. So he just pushes her into a building.
Yeah.
And almost like the Hulk punch in the Avengers, like just boom.
It had that kind of spirit. Speaking of Lana, I feel like, a couple of things. One, to your earlier point, not a lot of Lana, but like you said, it ended up being more than you remembered. Because again, I had previously watched the first dozen or so, and I don't think she was in any of them. And so I got through the first chunk of these, and I'm like, really no Lana to be had. You have her first appearance?
Not till episode 15 of season 1.
So I watched a good chunk of these, and it's like, all right, there's no Lana to be found. And then she makes somewhat more regular appearances. I feel like you get all the flavors of Lana over the course of these segments, where there are times where she is more dismissive of Clark, especially when he's really playing into the cowardly, timid act, like when they're taken by the Gorilla Gang, for example, or the terrible trio episode, which we need to talk about, where Clark will not confront the bullies. He's like, oh, that's a job for Superboy. So there's that dynamic. There are instances like the Robotville episode and then the Kryptonite necklace one, where there is this idea in her head that maybe Clark is Superboy. And at the end of the Robotville episode, you have, I think it's Krypto flying away with the robot dressed up as Clark, right, to divert her suspicion. So you get that. But then you do get episodes where she is, even if it's not a romantic interest per se, you do get the sense of friendship and care and concern, like with the hurricane and heck, even with the Kryptonite necklace, when she shows up, like she wants to show it to him, he faints, she's concerned. So I feel like you get a lot of the different varieties of the Lana dynamic over the course of these.
Yeah. I mean, the first thing she does in the Kryptonite caper, when she finds that little stone, she says, what a beautiful stone. It should make a pretty pendant. I can't wait to show it to Clark Kent.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, out of all the supporting cast, I mean, she has the most to do. Like we talked about with Ma and Pa, very, very minimal. I mean, Ma in particular. I mean, literally, she just in 2 episodes says you're going to be late. Pa, I talked about this when I had Dan on for that prior segment. There's that one episode where Superboy loses his eyesight, and he's down about this. And Pa's initial response is like, well, you have other powers. And it's like, all right. But then when Superboy gets that message, right, from law enforcement, and he's not sure what to do, and Pa's like, you answer it. And it's like, okay, he's offering some guidance. Other than that, mostly he says good luck. I feel like Ma's thing was you're going to be late, and Pa had at least a couple of episodes where he's like, good luck, son. So again, their role is minimal. Given the comics at the time, and given that we're talking 6-minute animated segments for little kids, I wouldn't expect a ton of a role for the two of them. But I don't know that much to say, because they're there, but not in a really substantial way.
I think that is just one of the axioms that a child in the 60s and 70s, we are reading the comics. So we can take the relationship of Ma and Pa Kent as a given, and they'll save the animation time and sort of show other things. But you're absolutely right. That one scene where Superboy basically says, I can't go out there. I can't be a help, but they're asking me for my help. What do I do? And Pa says, you answer it, son. And it was so strong and so certain that those few words felt 100% Pa Kent. It was said with love, but it was also said with wisdom and certainty. And that felt like Pa.
Yeah, no, that's the thing. And a little bit of that really goes a long way. So there are two that I kind of put together in terms of this more unhinged category. One of them is certainly the Terrible Trio. The other one, to a lesser extent, but it's there too, is A Devil of a Time.
Oh boy.
Where in both instances you have Superboy teaching people a lesson in creative ways, arguably going too far, especially when we're talking about the Terrible Trio and the fact that he's dealing with 3 children, essentially. I guess I'm just curious what your take was on those, and or which one you'd like to start with, because I feel like those are a couple we definitely should spend a couple minutes on.
Well, we can do them in order because the Devil of a Time came first, I think.
Yes.
So in this story, you think it's going to go one way. You think it's a nice Halloween Smallville High dance, and it starts off. Lana looks so pretty. She's literally an angel. She has wings. She has a little, white dress. And Clark walks up, and you think, oh, this is maybe going to be a really sweet Clark and Lana episode. And Clark walks up as a devil. And they don't talk very long at all before Clark sees at a distance, oh, that's that criminal that the police chief has asked me to always be on the lookout for. So he makes his excuse to Lana, who, by the way, asked Clark to dance. She extended the invitation. Clark, would you like to dance with me? And he makes his excuse. Oh, I forgot something, and so I really thought, oh, they're going to come back to this. It's going to be very, very sweet. They do, and they don't. So most of the episode is he thinks, well, I'm going to go teach, these guys a lesson. But instead of changing into my Superboy outfit, I'm just going to stay dressed as the devil and use my superpowers to convince them that I am the devil, and put them basically through this gauntlet of horror where they think they've made a deal with the devil and it all goes wrong, even to the point where he uses his knowledge of science to say, well, these little rocks that happen to be outside the high school are made of magnesium, and I can use them to make these sulfur clouds that will convince them of who I am. But it's very sort of thinly constructed plot where he exchanges one wish for 3. They get to make 3 wishes, but then they have to do one that he says. And it's so convenient, the 3 wishes that they made. Had they made different wishes, that Superboy's plot, would not have worked. The first wish is they want the biggest diamond in the world. So he goes to a coal mine, scoops up basically an armful of coal, and brings them back a diamond as big as their chest. And they go, well, we can't fence this. This is no good. We'd rather have cash. So then they wish for $1 million. So he goes to the factory where they counterfeit money. He takes their own counterfeit money and brings it. And they say, well, this is no good. And the Superboy devil goes, oh, well, that's too bad, because while I was there, I called the police about your counterfeit ring. And then they said, well, our third wish is just get us out of here where the police can never find us. So he takes them to a volcano to make them think that it's, as they put it, the other place.
I know. When they said that, I was like, wow, like this cartoon went there. I mean, obviously, yes, they don't literally say hell, but it's like, that's what these guys think. I know. It's like, this is pretty out there.
Yeah. And then, at that point, they beg to be not there. And he says, okay, well then, my wish is that you write down on these pieces of paper, which came from nowhere, all the crimes you've ever done and all the criminals you've ever done them with, just for our evil records. And then, of course, he uses that to turn them into the police, and that's their confession. And then he comes back to Lana, and it's sort of a missed opportunity between the two of them. This is the one episode Crypto is not in.
Oh, right on. Yeah, you're right.
But what a twisted a way for such a good boy to have approached the fact that he saw two criminals on a park bench talking about counterfeiting. I mean, there were so many Superboy ways he could have handled that, but instead he did this Twilight Zone torture.
I know. I mean, there's something, I was going to say devilish, but yeah, like, there's something very twisted. I mean, honestly, even before that, the fact that he chooses to dress up as the devil for Halloween, I mean, nothing wrong with that per se, but also I wouldn't necessarily expect that from Clark Kent. But look, he's got to get it out somewhere. So, he'll indulge in that for the Halloween party. All right. I mean, it seems like he really, and again, this will feed into the terrible trio, but like, it seemed like he really wanted to teach them a lesson, but to do it to pretend he's literally the devil and eventually, like you said, has taken them to hell as far as they know. It's just like, what a kind of a dark streak for the Boy of Steel. I didn't think he had it in him.
This would have worked as a Red Kryptonite story, or if he had lost some portion of his memory and just sort of came to, and he saw this costume and he was not quite himself. Also, very, very convenient that Smallville is next to a volcano.
Yeah.
No, but over the course of these episodes, you really start to question, where is Smallville? Because Smallville itself is a very interesting contrivance. In the opening credits, you see that it's a fairly decently sized town/city. It's not just a couple of stores on Main Street, but it's at the base of what looks like the mountain from Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Like literally at the base of that mountain. And I triple checked this every time with the narration to make sure that they really said that these locations are near Smallville or in Smallville, not some other location. Smallville has nearby deserts and forests, and Smallville itself is built in a canyon in which one episode they're in danger of being flooded. So they built this large town at the base of a mountain in a canyon. It's also very near the ocean for all of the ocean adventures, of which there were multiple sea monsters. But Smallville is built above a uranium ore deposit. It's built above various deposits of emeralds, and it is the home of an observatory, a uranium refinery. It has science labs with huge funding. It has more scientists than you could name that are living and working in Smallville. And so it's just this perfect writer's utopia of anything we want to do, we've created the environment of Smallville to do. It can be land, sea, air, meteors they come straight to Smallville. I really started to have a theory of how can this be? And I think it's going to be something akin to Sunnydale.
As you were saying that, the first thought that crossed my mind, and I didn't want to interrupt you, but I was going to say it's on a Hellmouth. Yes. Because there's a point where Superman just digs straight to the Earth's core, and he seems to get there very quickly and very easily. And so it makes me wonder, there's something about Smallville that draws this craziness. And perhaps that's what drew his baby rocket ship. So all of these crazy whacked out things are there because Smallville is somehow attracting them, which possibly is also the reason that all these gangsters and low street level criminals are constantly thinking they can pull off crimes in the town where Superman lives. Yeah. Well, I know it's true. It's like, it's enough of a stretch when we're talking about Superman and Metropolis, but it's like Metropolis is still the big city. Even with the threat of Superman, maybe they feel the benefit outweighs the risk and they're going to go for it. It's still a stretch, but okay. But yeah, to try to enact these things in this small town overseen by Superboy is really a lot. It's really a tall order.
And especially when apparently he can just get unhinged every now and then.
And teach you a lesson. Well, I mean, I guess Smallville is whatever it needs to be, and it's wherever it needs to be to serve the story, I suppose. But so kind of along those lines, there's the terrible trio. And this was the one that Dan Greenfield brought up when we did that other episode. And I know it's the one I think that stood out the most to him. And he was very gracious. He didn't spoil it because I think he hoped I would eventually be able to see it. But boy, did I. So this was the last episode of season 2. And you've got these 3 bullies at Smallville High who are pushing around this little kid. And I mentioned this earlier. This is where Atlanta kind of makes this plea to Clark, like, hey, like, step in. And he's like, no, Atlanta, it's a job for Superboy. And literally, he goes and he changes into Superboy. And he shows up and he takes these 3 kids and he offers, once again, with the wishes. Like, he asks each of them what they want, and then he gives them a twisted version of that will teach them a lesson. The fact that he does that at all, again, feels like a bit much. Not that these kids aren't little snots who need to be taught a lesson, but this really maybe felt like overkill. But the first one says that he wants to be a big shot. Okay. Now, you can interpret that a lot of ways. Superboy's interpretation is to take this kid to a rocket launch and like fly him to the tip of the rocket and like threaten to put him on it.
Yeah, he took the word shot very, very literally.
Yeah.
Here's the thing that will be shot into space. You'll be the biggest shot of all the shots that have ever been shot. So here you are, you little shot. So many other ways that could have been handled.
And then the second kid wants a kingdom of his own. And this was so bizarre. So Superboy takes his kid to another planet populated by these vegetable people.
Right.
So you've got carrots and whatever else, corn, right? Corn
and tomatoes.
And tomatoes.
The girls were tomatoes. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the kingdom that this kid can rule over. The first kid almost got shot into space. The second kid gets taken off planet to another planet. It's funny to me because we've talked a lot on the George Reeves rewatch podcast that I do about the season 1 episode of Adventures of Superman, The Stolen Costume, where you have these bad guys who steal Superman's costume and put together that Clark is Superman. And so at the end of the episode, Clark is faced with a bit of a dilemma. What do you do with these 2 people who know his secret? And his solution is to put them atop a mountain in this cabin to live in. So he removes them from society and he's like, hey, don't try to climb down. I know you know this episode, but for any of our audience members who don't try to climb down. It's very dangerous. And as soon as he leaves to go bring back supplies for them, as soon as he flies away, they try to climb down and fall to their deaths. Aside from the fact that Clark seems completely unbothered by this in the final scene, if anything, he seems relieved. A lot of fans, like, it's been an ongoing debate over all these years. Like, is Superman responsible for their deaths? Is Superman a murderer? We did a whole article about it at 13th Dimension. The thing is, to me, whether or not he's responsible for their deaths is secondary. It's like the idea that he unilaterally took it upon himself, did not go through any criminal legal procedure, but he took it upon himself to imprison them on the mountains in this cabin. It felt like that's where the discussion really lies. So similarly here, it just kind of had shades of that, where you have Superboy taking matters into his own hands in an arguably extreme, over-the-top way, particularly given the fact that we're talking about children here. That one was really unhinged, I think is the right word.
And the repercussions of that, even just that one boy that he took to the vegetable planet, which, first of all, when they all started walking up towards him, he said, what are they doing? And Superboy says, well, they're coming to you because you're their king. I don't understand that. I don't think they would instantly just say you are our king. But that kid is going to talk about this. Yes, Superboy brought him back to Earth and said, did you learn a lesson? And the kid, absolutely. Yes, I did. But that kid is not going to tell this story. It is going to be known Superman kidnapped a child, or Superboy kidnapped a child, took him to another planet without his parents' consent, nothing. And so, irrespective that he just took a child and threatened to put him on the top of a rocket, this is kidnapping of children with no civil liberties involved. And I just would really, really question what happened after that.
I know that's the episode. That's the episode that I want to see. And it's also, and then the last kid wants to be the toughest, right? I think that's his wish. And so Superboy takes him, as we ultimately find out, to an amusement park and shows him this ghost head display, right? That the kid is freaked out by, but of course it's all just part of this this amusement park act. I mean, I guess they seem to be set straight by the end of this, but I question how effective this method would really be. I feel like they would be more severely traumatized rather than genuinely changed or remorseful.
My point exactly, because this is how supervillains are made.
Yes.
Hey, we were just picking on a kid in a schoolyard, as boys of our age do. And next thing you know, this person traumatized me, took me into the vacuum of space. I had no idea if I was going to live or die. I mean, this is where little villains are born. Also, would have been tremendously easy to just, through the legal system, attack Superboy and say, you cannot do this. And you are no longer a hero because you have crossed one of the most important lines that one person can cross, robbing someone of any decision-making power about their own life.
Yeah. I mean, and also, I mean, I'm not here to defend the bullies. The fact that they're pushing around the little kid at the beginning, obviously that's not right, but it's, how do I put this? It's like, if we had seen more extreme behavior from them, but it's like, it escalates so quickly. Yeah. Look, again, I know you categorized all these episodes and even something like the Devil one, which is a little weird. And we question this kind of dark, twisted streak, but they're adult criminals that he's dealing with. And it still doesn't feel as extreme as this. And this one just feels like such an outlier. When we look at these 34 segments, it really stands out.
The only way that I, as a lover of this series, can possibly spin this is an example of, he made a mistake. He should not have done this. And in his more mature years, he remembers that he really should not have done it even that one time, but he certainly will not treat people like that again. So as a stepping stone in his own growth, the fact that maybe he didn't get caught, but his own conscience told him, I should not grow into someone who does that as a response, gives us the Superman that we know. Other than that, I got nothing.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, we have to use our headcanon to fill that in. I mean, and unfortunately, for any kid watching this back in the day, you don't get that, right? It just seems like he was in the right here. So, I mean, I agree with it. If there had been like just a quick scene with the Kents at the table at the end where Pa's like, son, that might have been too far. And he's like, Pa, maybe you're right. Even that, but like, okay. Cause like these kids, the kid who went to the other planet, do you think he's ever going to eat vegetables again?
No.
So this kid's nutrition is just shot to hell. Who knows? Who knows what else will become of it. I mean, you're right when you talk about like a supervillain origin story, because you could take kid number 2, right? You could see, forecast a few years down the road, and it's like he makes it his life's mission to try to get back to that planet. Now he wants to rule over those vegetable people or whatever. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like these kids would be so messed up over that. Anyway, Unhinged was true.
Or he basically proves the Lex Luthor philosophy, which is we cannot trust someone with this kind of ultimate power, because on any given day, he can do something like this and we can do nothing about it. And this kid can say, I've lived the rest of my life in Smallville, and they throw Superboy parades, and there's a billboard, welcome to Smallville, the home of Superboy, and there's statues of him, and everyone talks about him like he's the most incredibly good boy. He kidnapped me and threw me onto an alien planet. His perception of what Superboy does with power is origin story. And I could see him hooking up with the numerous scientists that are strewn about Smallville, some of whom are evil, and saying, I'm with you. We have to do something about this guy.
No, 100%. Real quick, I am surprised. I mentioned before, we don't get the kind of classic villains that you might expect. The one that I guess most surprises me is Lex, because Filmation Superman used Lex. Mm-hmm. So were they to use a teenage version of the character, would have been in keeping with the comics, and they were using the character elsewhere in Filmation. So I am kind of surprised. The other thing, and I don't want to forget about this either, one of the reasons I think that the Filmation Superboy cartoons stand out to me are that we talked about that live action television pilot that didn't move forward, right? So that never, the pilot exists, but that's as far as it went. And eventually, yes, we'll get to that 4-season live action Superboy television series. Again, ironically, comes out after the character's been erased from comic book continuity, but at least that's there. But during that entire pre-crisis era, you have the unaired pilot and you have these Filmation Superboy shorts in terms of Superboy represented in other media.
Right.
So it really stands out. And I am aware, I know there are also a couple of episodes of Super Friends where the character appears, where you get the flashback to Lex's origin. And it's a very faithful recreation of that Silver Age comic book story. And then there's another one with time travel where we visit with Superboy in Smallville. But that's it. I mean, so he exists in that unaired pilot and animation. So again, I mean, I think Filmation generally earns its spot in the mythology for keeping these characters kind of in the public awareness during the 60s and beyond as people watch reruns, but especially during that period of time where we were past the George Reeves series and we weren't yet at the Christopher Reeve movie series, right? So they kept the characters out there, but especially for Superboy, these are the primary other media representation of Superboy in the entire pre-crisis era.
Oh, they're very important for keeping it alive. And 66 was the year of the Batman TV show premiere. So there was a tolerance for comic book-esque stories, the whole Biff Pow, the colors and all of that. So it was fertile ground for this kind of thing to do well. And, it went from 66 to 69, it lasted 3 seasons, such as it was, but it very much kept it alive. And there are some gems. There are some really good stories with some really good messages in here. So its value is to me, it's unquestioned. It kept the heart pumping.
What are the other standout episodes that were on your list that we haven't hit on yet?
So for various reasons, the Hurricane Fighters, the one that you mentioned, it's the first appearance of Lana Lang. And when they first sort of introduced them, they did such a good job. If you'd never met Lana in the comics, they did just an expert job of, in just a few seconds, you get to know who Lana is. They're on a school trip to the Metropolis, SeaWorld, basically. And Lana and Clark are sitting together and she says, "Aren't the seals just super, Clark?" And Clark says, "As super as Superboy, Lana?" And she just gushes. She swoons. "Oh, nothing could be that super." So it's established she's gaga over Superboy. But then as soon as Clark goes missing, she's genuinely worried for him. And she does nothing but constantly asking, "Is Clark okay? Where's Clark?" And then when he turns out that his cover was that he got into the tank with the SEALs, and he has a diving mask on, but he's taken his shirt off. So he's bare-chested Clark in the SEAL tank with all the muscles of Superboy. And I thought, I bet Lana's never seen him like that before.
That's a good point. Speaking of just kind of the visual representation, we get a lot of the classic red sweater, and I've really come to love that look for the Smallville teenage Clark. But there are times where he's in a suit, and it seems to be a red suit on more than one occasion, which feels like a very bold choice for anyone, especially a teenager trying to blend in this small town. I mean, a red suit?
Yeah, he has a red jacket and blue pants, which is even bolder. Lest any child not know this is really Superboy that we're looking at.
Yeah. But yeah, the Hurricane Fighters, what else was on your list?
So the one episode that had to do with magic is called The Black Knight. And it's also one of the very few that had to do with time travel. So they combined the two. It is an outlier, and it's not a perfect episode, but it touches on a few pretty sort of adventure story interesting things. The story starts where Clark is just in the general store helping out Pa, and this little boy Timmy, who apparently they're very familiar with, comes and says, "Hey Clark, look at this!" And he sets the suitcase down. He goes, "Look what I found in my grandpa's attic," and it belonged to the great Merlini, who was a direct descendant of Merlin. Okay, we get it. And so it's this red cloak, and so the kid puts it on, and he's just really excited and says, "Boy, I wish I was on the jousting field of Camelot in the days of King Arthur and the Round Table right now." And then poof, he's gone. And it sure is good that he wished something so specific.
Yeah.
But then Clark looks down and sees the note that fell out of the case.
Yeah,
and
written instructions, very handy.
Very handy written instructions, basically saying, put the cloak on and make a wish. So Clark realizes he's got to go save the kid. So he travels through time by spinning in place. So imagine Wonder Woman about 5 times fast forwarded. And he also apparently travels from Smallville to England with that same technique. But when he gets there, Merlin himself is there, and there's a Black Knight who's not a nice guy. And they assume that Superboy has magic. And so the Black Knight is told, well, go challenge him, and offers him a sword. Superboy says, "Oh, I won't need the sword." And so the Black Knight takes his own sword and just chops right at Superboy's neck. Now, he doesn't know that Superboy is invulnerable. Like, had he not been, that would have been the murder of a child. And these stories sort of gloss over that because we know he's invulnerable, but the Knight didn't. And so right then you think, oh, this is going to be one of those off the rails episodes. But Superboy is just handling him the same way he handled some of the alien bullies, just with a sense of humor and very gently. He's being respectful to Arthur. And so basically Arthur says, well, hey, come here and try pulling out the sword from the stone, which he does, which then now means Superboy is the king, according to the rules that are apparently still in effect, which is kind of crazy. So we're a few minutes into this episode, and Superboy has taken the throne from King Arthur. Merlin immediately uses magic to take the sword out of Superboy's hand and puts it in the Black Knight's hand, which, if we're going to go with Superboy susceptible to magic, just like Superman is, okay, that's how we could take it out of Superboy's hand. And so now the Black Knight is, I'm the king. So Superboy has to fight him. But he's also cognizant that he needs to look out for Arthur's throne. And so there's this really clever solution to that, where the Black Knight is fighting him, and it says, "Thou cannot escape from the magic sword." But Superboy says, "But the magic sword can escape from you." And he throws the stone at the guy, which reinserts the sword into the stone. And now it's too heavy for the guy to hold. And he's lost his claim on the throne. And now it goes back to Arthur, which he immediately rats out Merlin, saying, "Merlin put me up to this." And Merlin says, gotta go, and poofs away, which to me could have been the ultimate setup for a return. I would have loved to have seen a follow-up episode where Merlin now appears in modern day, getting revenge on Superboy for this thing that's happened in the past. But in the end, he takes Timmy and spins the other way and returns to modern day. But that, I think you could not get more Silver Age comic book story than that. That is that kind of wild, off the wall, 6 different things happen in one adventure kind of comic that made you feel like you got your 10 cents worth. So in that vein of, if you love that type of thing, there were some episodes that gave you exactly what you were hoping for.
Yeah, no, right on. And you're right. That combo of the time travel and the magic, it's really the 1-2 punch.
Yeah. And then, of course, the Crypto, the super seeing eye dog, equally stretching a premise thin just to get it to kick off. Superboy and Crypto go up to what they think is a meteor coming to Smallville, but instead it's actually a Krypton safe where weapons from Krypton have been put in this safe and launched into space because they didn't want anyone on Krypton to get them, and they happened to come to Earth. And Crypto is barking at it, and Superboy reads it, and it says, "These are very, very dangerous weapons that we couldn't trust ourselves with." And Superboy says, "Let's open it up." And so he doesn't touch any of them, but Crypto's got his face and his paw in there, and he accidentally hits the switch on one of the weapons, and it blinds Superboy, and that's what causes his blindness. So Crypto has to sort of help him out and do all these things. But throughout that episode, you really feel the bond that Superboy and Crypto have, because now he truly has to rely on his dog. He goes to Pa for advice. Pa can't help him. There's no one else. He literally, his life is in Crypto's hands. And in the end, there's an explosion, which is usually the case. It takes another trauma to fix the first trauma. But when it first happened, I was so struck by the fact that Superboy wasn't angry at Crypto. And he said, "Oh boy, I know you didn't mean it, but I'm blind." And that struck me, that's who Superboy is. He understands that not everything happens with ill intent. He assumes the good. And then at the very end, when it all works out, and Crypto does actually help him in multiple occasions, save some lives and do some things. Crypto does the wink and the wag toward camera, like, "Hey, I'm the hero." And that was the one episode where I thought, I don't know if you deserve the end of show wink.
No, I'm glad you brought that one up. That was one that stood out to me when I watched that first batch, and I mentioned that to Dan last time, but that was more in the context of the Pa role and the fact that it was a takeoff on the Adventure Comics issue that introduced the Phantom Zone, because same type of thing where they find the safe and there's a Phantom Zone projector. But I hadn't really thought about it as much in the context of Crypto. So I appreciate your insight on that one. What else have we not talked about with these that you wanted to?
I think just the takeaway is that these probably wouldn't stand up today, but they have a value and they have a charm. And if you can sort of transport yourself back to that time, this was 1966. Kennedy had just been killed 3 years prior. The Cold War was going on. Vietnam was going on. So these, yes, they were innocent and they were childlike in their innocence, but this was a time for that. And I think that's one of the reasons that just culturally you saw a lot of these. In '67, the Justice League cartoon started by Filmation, and it was equally true to the Silver Age. And they would wrap that up in the variety program where you would have a Justice League episode, but then you might get a standalone Hawkman or a standalone Atom or Flash or Green Lantern. And so these Silver Age pure stories, honestly, they didn't have to be perfect. They just had to have that heart. And that, I think, is what I would want people to take away from this is look at them for the heart that they have. And that this is a journey that Superboy took, and he didn't always do it perfectly. But even as a child, I remember thinking, like the Terrible Trio, I thought, I'm a little boy and I know that's not right. So he in essence was still teaching me right from wrong. And so that was still my lesson from those. But he had loyalty. He put his friends first. He had a sense of humor. He had a respect of elders and authority figures. He exercised, for the most part, restraint. He showed forgiveness. He demonstrated goodness. He was clever. He was brave. He accepted help. And he just wanted to try. And that, I think, that stands the test of time in any format.
Well said. Honestly, if you had told me I would enjoy these as much as I did, I would have been like, I don't know. But I really did. I had a good time with them. And I do long for the day where we get a beautiful Blu-ray set of these. And honestly, I would happily sit my soon-to-be 5-year-old son down and then watch these. And I think he'd get a kick out of them, honestly. especially with Crypto. But they're fun stories and very much a companion to the comics. And we had mentioned last time, but just to reiterate, Clark and Superboy voiced by Bob Hastings, who, among many other credits, would go on to voice Commissioner Gordon in Batman the Animated Series.
Yeah, and for any Fleischer cartoon fans who may say, well, this isn't Fleischer. No, it's not. But there is a great nod to the Fleischer era in the last episode of the first season, The Revolt on Robotville, where they do an homage to the melted steel being poured on someone, and Superman swoops in and extends his cape and saves the person by putting his body over theirs. And the change sequence where he changes from Clark into Superboy is done in silhouette with these solid colors behind. And then when Lana looks for where Clark is, she's in silhouette. And then the villain is looking to see what's happening, and then he's in silhouette. And they take it even further when Superboy is fighting about 4 robots in a row. They do that in silhouette, and he has this great, takes them out in one punch. And it's just this standout 10 seconds that's done with such style, such artistic style, that you get this glimpse that in another set of circumstances where they had a bigger budget, they could have given us more of those moments.
No, for sure. No, I appreciated those when we got them. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I think in terms of the designs, they're simple, they're clean, they're classic. And I think it does a nice job, and they were fun to watch and really fun to talk about. So I thank you very much.
Oh, yeah. They're very, very enjoyable. And if you like them the first time, they're very rewatchable.
Right on. So where would you like to direct folks if they're curious and following your cosplay adventures?
Well, ironically, I also cosplay with my very own Crypto. And if you would like to see what that looks like, you can see that on Instagram at Wearing the Cape, where we both wear capes. But it's very nice. We are often invited to places together, which shows the staying power of Superboy and Crypto and Superman and Crypto. We were invited to the premiere of DC League of Super Pets. We're often invited to little county fairs here in Texas. Crypto is still very, very much loved in modern day. And also from time to time, I will write a Superman article for dailyplanetdc.com. So you can look for me there under Daniel Sanchez.
Awesome. All right. Well, Daniel, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure when we can connect and do one of these. And I appreciate you watching all 34 and taking notes and coming in with all of the insight and passion and enthusiasm. It really made for a fun conversation. So I thank you. I thank you, audience. Always appreciate you tuning in. Make sure you come back next week for another all new episode. And until then, as always, it's about what you do. It's about action. Be sure to check out our sister podcast series, Another Exciting Episode in the Adventures of Superman, an episode-by-episode breakdown of the classic George Reeves television show, available wherever you get podcasts. Please join us on social media, become a patron, and subscribe, rate, and review today. Links are in the show notes. Thank you all.